The marble floors of the Harbor Crest Hotel were polished to such a high sheen that they looked more like a frozen lake than a hotel lobby. For Ava Miller, standing behind the reception desk for the 9th hour straight, the floor was just another beautiful, hard thing that offered no comfort. Her feet throbbed in shoes that had been resoled twice, and the ache in her lower back was a dull, constant rhythm, beating in time with the headache pressing behind her eyes. It was a Tuesday evening, and the upscale lobby was humming with the low, expensive murmur of guests who had never had to count pennies at a grocery store checkout. Crystal chandeliers cast a golden glow over the mahogany paneling, and the air smelled of fresh lilies and old money. Ava smoothed the front of her uniform, forcing a smile as a guest handed over a platinum credit card. She typed in the details, her fingers moving automatically, while her mind drifted to the stack of envelopes sitting on her kitchen table. Medical bills. They were always white envelopes with red urgent stamps. Her mother's treatment for a chronic autoimmune disorder was eating through Ava's paycheck before the money even hit her account. Rent was due in 3 days. She had $40 in her checking account, and her refrigerator contained half a carton of milk and a jar of pickles. She had skipped lunch to save $5, and she had skipped dinner the night before because she was too tired to cook the rice she had left in the pantry. "You are doing fine," she told herself, handing the key card to the guest with a practiced nod. "Just 2 more hours, then you can go home and sleep." The Harbor Crest was not just any hotel in the city's hushed circles. It was common knowledge that the property belonged to the Romano family. They were old money, old power, and if the whispers were true, old crime. The staff gossiped about it in the break room with a mixture of fear and excitement. They talked about Dante Romano as if he were a mythical creature, a man who ruled the city from the shadows. "He's coming tonight," Sarah, the concierge, had whispered to Ava earlier, her eyes wide. "The big boss, Mr. Henderson, is hyperventilating in his office." Ava had only shrugged. To her, Dante Romano was just another rich man who would walk past her without seeing her. She did not have the energy to be afraid of a Mafia don. She was too busy being afraid of the electric company turning off her lights. "I just hope he does not complain about the flower arrangements," Ava had replied, turning back to her computer. But the invisible weight of the Romano name hung over the staff all evening. The bellhop stood straighter. The manager paced the floor, checking his watch every 30 seconds. Ava tried to keep her head down, hoping to remain invisible. Invisibility was her best defense. It was how she survived the rude guests, the predatory looks from businessmen at the bar, and the crushing shame of her poverty. Then the revolving doors spun, and the atmosphere in the lobby shifted. It was not Dante Romano. It was Kyle. Ava felt the blood drain from her face. Her hands froze over the keyboard. Kyle was wearing a leather jacket that had seen better days, and his eyes were darting around the lobby with a frantic, agitated energy that clashed violently with the serene elegance of the hotel. He looked out of place, like a grease stain on silk. He spotted her instantly. A twist of a smile appeared on his face as he marched toward the desk, ignoring the bellman who tried to intercept him. "Ava," he said, leaning his elbows on the high marble counter. "You look good in the uniform. Very professional." "Please leave," Ava whispered, glancing around to see if Mr. Henderson had noticed. "Kyle, you cannot be here. If my manager sees you, I will lose this job." "I do not care about your job," Kyle said, his voice dropping to a rough hiss. "I need cash. Ava, I am in a hole. A deep one. $2,000 by tomorrow morning, or legs get broken." "I do not have money," Ava hissed back, her heart hammering against her ribs. "You took everything I had when you left. You maxed out my credit cards. You stole my mother's medication money. I have nothing left for you to take." Kyle's face darkened. The charming, manipulative mask he used to wear slipped, revealing the desperation and cruelty underneath. He reached over the counter, his hand shooting out to grab her wrist. His grip was hard, punishing. "Do not lie to me," he snarled. "You work at the fanciest hotel in the city. I know you have a stash somewhere. You're going to go to that ATM in the lobby, and you are going to pull out whatever you can. Or maybe I start making a scene. Maybe I start telling these nice guests what a little liar you are. Maybe I find out where your mother is staying now." The mention of her mother made a cold spike of terror drive through Ava's chest. The stress of the last few weeks, combined with the lack of food, suddenly crashed down on her. The edges of her vision began to blur. The golden light of the chandeliers seemed to warp and stretch. "Let go of me," she said, but her voice was weak, barely a breath. She tried to pull her wrist back, but Kyle held on, twisting her skin. "You are hurting me," she gasped. "I will hurt you a lot more if you do not help me." Kyle spat. Suddenly, the air in the lobby changed. It was not a sound, but a silence. A heavy, suffocating silence that swept from the entrance and rolled across the room like a shockwave. The chatter of the guests died out. The clinking of glasses in the adjacent bar stopped. Kyle froze, sensing the shift. He looked over his shoulder. The revolving doors had stopped spinning. A group of 4 men had entered. They wore suits that cost more than Ava made in a year, tailored to perfection. Black on black, they moved with the synchronized grace of predators. But it was the man in the center who commanded the silence. Dante Romano. He was tall, with broad shoulders that filled out his charcoal suit with imposing ease. His hair was dark, swept back from a face that seemed carved from granite. Sharp cheekbones, a strong jaw, and eyes the color of a stormy sea. He did not look at the guests. He did not look at the decor. He walked with the terrifying confidence of a man who owned the ground beneath his feet and the air everyone else was breathing. Ava saw him through the tunnel vision that was rapidly closing in on her. He was terrifying. He was beautiful. And he was walking straight toward the reception desk. Kyle's grip on her wrist loosened slightly, his bravado crumbling in the face of true power. But the damage was done. The adrenaline spike, followed by the sheer physical exhaustion of her body, was too much. Ava's knees turned to water. The room tilted violently to the left. She felt herself falling. She saw the horrified expression of Mr. Henderson rushing forward. She saw Kyle shrinking back, but mostly, she saw the dark figure of Dante Romano getting closer. She expected to hit the hard marble. She braced for the impact, closing her eyes, but the impact never came. Instead, strong arms caught her. It was a sudden, solid arrest of motion. One arm hooked around her waist, the other supporting her back, stopping her inches from the floor. She was hauled upward, pulled against a chest that felt as solid as a wall. The scent of sandalwood, expensive tobacco, and cold winter air filled her nose. Ava blinked, her head lolling back against his shoulder. For a moment, she was suspended in a strange, silent world where the only thing that existed was the heat radiating from the man holding her. Dante Romano looked down. His expression was impassive, a mask of bored detachment that he had worn since he walked through the doors. He had caught the feigning receptionist simply because he had been there, a reflex of a man with lightning-fast instincts. But then he saw. As he held her, Ava's uniform blouse had ridden up slightly on her left side. The fabric pulled away from her skin, exposing her ribcage. There, stamped against the pale, translucent skin of her side, were bruises. They were ugly, yellowing things, older marks shaped like fingers, fading into purple at the edges. They were the telltale signs of being grabbed, shaken, and thrown. Dante's gaze froze on the marks. His eyes narrowed, the stormy gray darkening to black. His gaze traveled down to her wrist, the one Kyle had just been twisting. It was red and irritated, but just below the cuff of her sleeve, he saw the silver flash of a medical bracelet. He knew what those bracelets meant. He read the small engraving with a glance sharp enough to cut glass: severe anemia, bleeding disorder. The realization hit him like a physical blow. This woman was starving. She was sick. She was fragile. And someone had put their hands on her. Something inside Dante Romano. Something he kept locked behind iron bars of discipline and cold indifference. Snapped. The mask fell. For the first time in years, Dante lost control. It was not a loud explosion. It was a drop in temperature that froze the blood of everyone nearby. His face contorted, a flash of pure, unadulterated fury twisting his features, his lip curled back from his teeth in a snarl that was entirely primal. He looked up from the unconscious woman in his arms and locked eyes with Kyle. Kyle, who had been backing away, stopped dead. He made a small, pathetic sound in the back of his throat. He looked into Dante's eyes and saw his own death reflected there. Who did this? Dante's voice was a low rumble, like thunder vibrating through the floorboards. It was not a question, it was a sentence. Kyle stammered, raising his hands. I did not. She is my girlfriend. We were just talking. Dante shifted Ava's weight, pulling her higher against his chest as if to shield her from even the sight of the man before him. He did not look at his security team. He did not have to. Get him out of my sight, Dante ordered. His voice was terrifyingly calm now, which was far worse than the shouting. Before I kill him on this floor. Two of the black-suited men moved instantly. They descended on Kyle with efficient brutality. One grabbed Kyle's arm, twisting it behind his back with a force that made Kyle yelp, while the other clamped a hand over his mouth to stifle the noise. They dragged him backward toward the exit, his heels skidding uselessly on the marble. Dante did not watch them leave. His focus had returned entirely to the woman in his arms. She was dangerously light, bird-like bones under a cheap polyester uniform. Her skin was clammy, her breathing shallow. Mr. Henderson, the manager, fluttered into view, wringing his hands, his face pale with panic. Mr. Romano, sir, I'm so sorry. She is just... I will call an ambulance immediately. I will have her removed. Do not touch her, Dante snapped. The command cracked through the air like a whip. Mr. Henderson recoiled. Get Doctor Evans to the penthouse suite, now. Dante did not wait for a response. He turned and strode toward the elevators, carrying Ava as easily as if she were a child. The guests parted like the Red Sea. No one dared to speak. No one dared to take a picture. They simply watched as the most dangerous man in the city carried the unconscious receptionist through the lobby, his face set in a grim mask of protective fury. Inside the elevator, the doors slid shut, cutting off the noise of the lobby. Dante looked down at Ava again. Her head rested against his shoulder, her dark hair spilling over his expensive lapel. He could feel the slow, faint beat of her heart against his chest. He felt a strange tightness in his throat, a foreign sensation of panic. He had seen violence his entire life. He had seen men broken and bleeding. But the sight of those old, yellowing bruises on this fragile woman's ribs had enraged him in a way he could not understand. "Why are you not eating?" he muttered to the unconscious woman, his thumb brushing lightly over her cheekbone, noting how sharp it felt. "Who did this to you?" The elevator chimed at the top floor. The doors opened directly into the private foyer of the owner's suite. Dante walked past the expensive art and the sprawling views of the city skyline. Kicking open the door to the master bedroom, he laid her down on the massive bed. The mattress was soft, covered in Egyptian cotton sheets that cost more than her entire wardrobe. Against the dark gray duvet, she looked even paler. Doctor. Evans arrived 3 minutes later, breathless and carrying a medical bag. He was an older man, discreet and paid very well to ask no questions. She fainted, Dante said, standing by the window, his back to the room. He could not look at her right now. If he looked at the bruises again, he would want to go downstairs and finish what his men had started with Kyle. She is anemic, malnourished, I think, and she has injuries on her ribs. Check them. The doctor worked in silence for 10 minutes while Dante stared out at the city lights, his hand gripping a glass of whiskey he had not taken a sip of. She is coming around. Doctor, Evans said finally. Dante turned. Ava was stirring. Her eyelids fluttered, displaying confusion as she tried to orient herself. She pushed herself up on her elbows, then gasped, her hand going to her head. Easy, Dante said. He crossed the room in 2 long strides, sitting on the edge of the bed. He was careful to keep his distance, but his presence dominated the room. Ava blinked, her eyes focusing on him. For a moment, she looked terrified. She pulled the duvet up to her chin, her eyes darting around the luxurious room. "Where am I?" she whispered. Her voice was raspy. "You are in my suite," Dante said. His voice was low, stripped of the anger he had shown in the lobby, but it was firm. "You collapsed in the lobby. I brought you here." The memory rushed back to her. Kyle. The argument, the dizziness, the man in the suit. Ava's face flushed a deep crimson. "Oh God, I'm so sorry. I have to go back to work. Mr. Henderson is going to fire me." "Mr. Henderson will do exactly what I tell him to do," Dante said. "And you are not going back to work tonight. You are barely conscious." He reached out, his hand hovering for a second before he decided against touching her. He gestured to the glass of water and a small plate of fruit the doctor had set on the bedside table. "Eat," he commanded. Ava hesitated, then took a slice of apple. Her hand was trembling. She ate it quickly, her body crying out for the sugar. "Who was the man?" Dante asked. Ava froze mid-chew. She looked down at her lap. "Nobody." "A guest." "Do not lie to me, Ava." Dante's voice dropped an octave. It was not a threat, but a warning. "I saw the way he was holding you, and I saw the bruises on your ribs when I caught you." Ava instinctively wrapped her arms around herself, flinching. It was a subtle movement, but Dante saw it. It was the movement of someone who expected to be hit. "I fell," she said quickly. "I walked into a doorframe in my apartment. I am clumsy." Dante studied her face. He saw the pride in her jaw, the fear in her eyes. She was lying to protect her dignity, not the man. "And the malnutrition?" he asked. "Why are you starving yourself?" "I am not starving myself," Ava said, lifting her chin defiantly, though her voice wavered. "I just forgot lunch. We have been busy." "You have a medical bracelet for a blood condition," Dante pressed. Relentless. "You know you cannot skip meals. You know what happens. I'm fine." "Mr. Romano," she said, using his name formally, trying to put distance between them. "Thank you for helping me." "Truly, but I need to go home. My shift is over." She tried to swing her legs out of bed, but the room spun again, and she had to grip the mattress to steady herself. Dante watched her struggle. He felt a fierce urge to wrap her in the blankets and keep her there until she was safe and whole, but he knew that would only terrify her more. She was a wounded animal, and she needed to feel free to stop panicking. "Fine," he said, standing up. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out a heavy black card with gold embossing. He placed it on the bedside table next to her hand. "I am having my driver take you home," he said. "My men will escort you to your door." "I can take the bus," Ava protested. "You will take the car," Dante cut in, "and you will take this card." Ava looked at the card. It had a single phone number on it. No name. "If that man comes near you again," Dante said, leaning down so his face was level with hers. "If anyone comes near you, if you feel unsafe, you call that number. Day or night. Do you understand?" Ava looked up at him for the first time. She really looked at him. She saw the hardness in his face. Yes, but she also saw something else in his gray eyes. Worry. Genuine. Confusing worry. "Why?" she whispered. "Why do you care?" Dante paused. He did not know the answer himself. He just knew that when he had felt her fragile weight in his arms, the world had shifted on its axis. "Because," he said softly, his voice rough with unspoken emotion, "I do not like seeing beautiful things broken." He straightened up, buttoning his jacket, the mask sliding back into place. "The car is waiting downstairs. Do not make the driver wait." He turned and walked toward the door, leaving Ava sitting in the middle of the massive bed, clutching the black card in her hand like a lifeline, her heart pounding a rhythm she could not quite understand. She watched him go, feeling the lingering warmth of his presence in the cool, empty room. The rumor mill at the Harbor Crest Hotel moved faster than the high-speed elevators. By the time Ava Miller returned to her shift 2 days later, still feeling a little shaky but desperate for the hours, the story of her collapse had mutated into a modern fairy tale with a dark twist. "Did you hear he carried her all the way to the penthouse?" Sarah whispered loudly in the break room, leaning over her cup of lukewarm coffee. "I heard he did not even let the paramedics touch her until they were upstairs. He probably just didn't want a lawsuit." Another receptionist, Jessica, chimed in. though her tone was thick with jealousy. If I fainted, Mr. Henderson would just roll me under the desk and tell me to wake up before the next check-in. Ava stood by her locker, trying to make herself as small as possible. She kept her eyes focused on the buttons of her uniform, her fingers fumbling slightly as she fastened them. She had hoped, naively, that the incident would be swept under the rug. Instead, she felt like a specimen under a microscope. Every time a black SUV pulled up to the valet stand, heads turned and eyes darted toward her, waiting to see if the king of the city would come to claim the fainting girl again. She tried to pretend nothing had happened. She held her head high, smiled at guests until her cheeks ached, and avoided looking at the elevators that led to the penthouse suites. She told everyone who asked that it was just low blood sugar, a moment of weakness that meant nothing, but it did mean something. She could still feel the phantom sensation of Dante Romano's arms around her, the solid, unyielding strength of his chest, and the terrifying intensity of his gray eyes when he had looked at her bruises. That memory kept her awake at night, warring with the fear of the card he had left her, the black card with the gold number that sat on her nightstand like an unexploded grenade. On Thursday afternoon, the illusion of normalcy shattered. Mr. Henderson approached the front desk, looking paler and more nervous than usual. He smoothed his tie 3 times before speaking. "Ava," he said, his voice tight. "You are needed upstairs." Ava froze, her hand hovering over the telephone. "Upstairs? The executive suite." "Mr." Henderson clarified, looking everywhere except at her eyes. "Mr. Romano wishes to speak with you regarding the incident the other night. Go now. Do not make him wait." The walk to the elevator felt like a march to the gallows. As the doors slid shut and the car began its smooth, silent ascent, Ava watched the floor numbers climb, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Why was he calling her? Was he going to fire her? Had she caused too much of a scene? When the doors opened, a burly security guard patted her down with professional detachment before nodding toward the double mahogany doors at the end of the hall. Ava knocked once, her knuckles trembling, and heard a deep, resonant voice command her to enter. Dante Romano was sitting behind a desk that looked like it had been carved from a single piece of ancient timber. The office was expansive, walled with floor-to-ceiling glass that offered a panoramic view of the city he supposedly ruled. The room smelled of leather and expensive scotch. He did not look up immediately. He was reading a document, his brow furrowed in concentration. Ava stood in the center of the room, feeling small and out of place in her hotel uniform. "Sit," Dante said, finally looking up. He gestured to one of the plush leather chairs opposite him. It was not a request. Ava sat, keeping her back straight and her hands folded tightly in her lap to hide their shaking. "How are your ribs?" he asked abruptly. "They are fine," she lied. Dante leaned back, studying her with that unnerving, predatory focus. "You are a terrible liar, Ava. And looking at the circles under your eyes, you have not been sleeping. And I would bet my next acquisition that you skipped breakfast again." Ava bristled. Anger, sudden and sharp, flared through her fear. "Is there a reason you called me here? Mr. Romano?" she asked, her voice steady despite her nerves. "If you are going to fire me for causing a disruption in the lobby, please just do it. I have to go pick up my mother's medication before the pharmacy closes." Dante's eyes flashed, not with anger, but with something like amusement. "I am not firing you," he said. "Quite the opposite." He reached into a drawer and pulled out a thick manila folder, sliding it across the polished surface of the desk until it rested just inches from her hands. "Open it," he commanded. Ava hesitated, then reached out and flipped the folder open. It was an employment contract. Her eyes scanned the pages, widening as they landed on the figures. The salary listed was triple what she made at the front desk. It was more money than she had ever seen in writing. "What is this?" she breathed. "I need a personal assistant," Dante said calmly, tenting his fingers. "My previous one lacked discretion and the ability to anticipate my needs. You are organized. You handle high-pressure situations with guests well, and you are already on my payroll. This is a promotion." Ava looked up, stunned. "Mr. Romano, I am a receptionist. I do not have experience managing whatever it is you do. You manage a life that is falling apart while working 60 hours a week," Dante countered, his voice hard. "That requires a level of resilience most people with MBAs do not possess." He pointed a long finger at the contract. "Look at the benefits clause. Ava," she looked down again, "full medical, dental, and vision, 100% coverage, no deductibles, immediate enrollment. It also included a stipend for family care." Ava's breath hitched. This would cover her mother's treatments, all of them. The infusions, the specialists, the medication that cost more than their rent. It was a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. But she knew who Dante Romano was. Everyone knew. To step into his office was to step into the shadows. "I cannot," she whispered, closing the folder. "I know what people say about this family. I just want a quiet life, Mr. Romano. I cannot be involved in illegal things." Dante did not flinch. He did not deny the accusation. "You think your life is quiet now?" he asked, his voice low. "You are drowning in debt. You are being hunted by an ex-boyfriend who clearly has no problem hurting you. You are one medical emergency away from being on the street. That is not quiet. Ava, that is desperate." He stood up and walked around the desk, leaning against the edge of it so he was looming over her, forcing her to look up at him. "I am offering you a job," he said, his voice dropping to a velvety rumble that vibrated in her chest. "You will manage my schedule. You will screen my calls. You will organize my travel. You will not be asked to carry a gun or commit a crime. You will be safe, and your mother will have the best doctors in the state by the end of the week." Ava looked at him, searching for the trap, but all she saw was a terrifying, pragmatic logic. He was offering her salvation, and all it would cost was her proximity to the devil. She thought of her mother, sitting in their drafty apartment, coughing into a handkerchief to hide the blood. She thought of the eviction notices Kyle had caused. "Can I really get her into a specialist this week?" Ava asked, her voice barely audible. Dante nodded once. "I will make the call myself while you sign the papers." Ava picked up the pen. Her hand shook, but she signed her name. The transition from the chaotic lobby to the silent, air-conditioned power of the executive suite was jarring. Ava's new desk was situated in an antechamber just outside Dante's office. It was sleek, modern, and equipped with technology she had to learn on the fly. Over the next 2 weeks, she learned that Dante Romano was a man of stark contradictions. She saw the ruthless negotiator. She sat in the corner of conference rooms, taking notes while Dante met with men who had scars on their faces and guns bulking under their jackets. She watched him speak in veiled threats, his voice never rising above a conversational volume, yet making grown men sweat and stutter. He could dismantle a business rival's confidence with a single sentence. He was cold, calculating, and utterly terrifying. But she also saw the other side. One afternoon, she was filing receipts and noticed a tuition payment for a private university. When she asked about it, thinking it was a mistake, Dante barely looked up from his laptop. "It is for the son of my former driver," he said. "The man died 2 years ago. The boy is smart. He belongs in school, not on the street. Another day." He had her order a massive arrangement of white roses for an elderly woman in the suburbs, a widow of a shopkeeper who had been loyal to the family. He wrote the card himself. Ava watched him when he didn't think she was looking. She saw the exhaustion in the lines around his eyes when he thought he was alone. She saw the way he rubbed his temples after a meeting with the syndicate bosses. He was a monster to the world, but he was a tired man carrying the weight of an empire to her. And he watched her, too. He noticed when she switched from coffee to herbal tea in the afternoons. He noticed when she wore a new sweater that wasn't threadbare. One Tuesday in late October, a severe storm battered the city. Rain lashed against the glass walls of the penthouse like bullets, and thunder shook the foundation of the building. It was late, nearly 9 in the evening. Dante was still in a meeting in his inner office, and Ava was finishing up the schedule for the next day. Suddenly, with a deafening crack of thunder, The building plunged into darkness. The power grid had failed. The backup generators had not kicked in yet. Ava gasped, dropping her pen. The darkness was absolute, thick, heavy, and suffocating. Panic, cold and sharp, seized her throat. The darkness instantly transported her back to a closet in her old apartment, where Kyle had locked her in for 6 hours because she had forgotten to buy him cigarettes. She could feel the walls closing in. She could feel the stale air. She could hear Kyle laughing on the other side of the door. She couldn't breathe. Her chest seized up. She gripped the edge of the desk, her nails digging into the wood, gasping for air that felt too thin. Ava? The voice cut through the blackness. A beam of light sliced through the room. Dante was there. He held a heavy tactical flashlight, not shining it in her face, but pointing it up at the ceiling so the room was bathed in a soft, diffused glow. He saw her instantly, the way she was hunched over, her eyes wide and unseeing, her chest heaving in rapid, shallow gasps. He set the flashlight on her desk and moved around it with fluid speed. He did not grab her. He knelt beside her chair, bringing himself to her level. "Ava," he said, his voice low and incredibly steady. "Look at me. I can't breathe," she choked out, tears of panic pricking her eyes. "You can," he said. He reached out and gently took her wrist. His large, warm hand engulfed her slender one. He placed his thumb directly over her racing pulse. "Focus on my voice," he commanded softly. "You are safe. You are in my office. The lights will be back in 10 seconds. Just breathe with me. In..." He took a deep, exaggerated breath. Ava tried to copy him, but it came out as a sob. Dante moved his hand from her wrist to her cheek, cupping her face. His thumb brushed away a tear that had escaped. The heat of his skin was shocking against her cold face. "Ava," he murmured. "Slowly. Matches mine." She focused on his eyes, which were reflecting the soft light of the flashlight. They were calm, anchoring her in the present. She took a breath, then another. Her heart rate began to slow, matching the steady rhythm he was setting. "There," he whispered. "Good girl." The panic began to recede, leaving behind a raw, trembling vulnerability. Ava realized how close they were. Dante was kneeling between her legs, his face inches from hers. The air in the room had shifted. It was no longer heavy with fear. It was thick with something else. Dante's gaze dropped to her lips, then back to her eyes. His thumb traced the line of her jaw, a feather-light touch that sent a shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with the cold. She could smell him. Rain, expensive cologne, and the warm, musk scent of a man. She felt the warmth of his body radiating toward her. "You are safe with me," he said, his voice dropping to a rough whisper. "I will not let the dark touch you." Ava leaned in. She couldn't help it. It was like gravity. She saw his pupils dilate. He leaned in too, his head tilting slightly. His breath brushed against her cheek, warm and tantalizing. They were a breath away from touching. Ava's eyelids fluttered shut, her lips parting slightly in anticipation. The building vibrated as the massive backup generators roared to life. The overhead lights flickered and then blazed on, flooding the office with harsh, artificial brightness. The spell shattered. Ava jerked back as if she had been burned. She scrambled to stand up, knocking her chair back. Her face was flaming red. I am so sorry," she stammered, smoothing her skirt with shaking hands. I do not like the dark." Dante stood up slowly. He looked composed, but there was a tension in his jaw that hadn't been there before. He picked up the flashlight and clicked it off. "Go home. Ava," he said, his voice tight. "The driver is downstairs. Get some rest." He turned and walked back into his office without looking back, closing the door firmly behind him. 2 nights later, the bubble of safety Dante had constructed around her was threatened. Ava finished her shift at 7 in the evening. She felt a strange mix of exhaustion and exhilaration these days. The work was hard, but she felt useful. And for the first time in years, her mother was sleeping soundly, her pain managed by top-tier medication. She walked out of the service entrance, intending to catch the waiting town car, when a figure stepped out from behind a concrete pillar. Kyle. And he looked worse than before, unshaven, his clothes stained, his eyes wild with a mixture of drugs and desperation. "You think you are too good for me now?" he sneered, blocking her path. Ava gasped, clutching her purse to her chest. She took a step back. "Kyle, leave me alone. You are sleeping with him, aren't you?" Kyle spat, stepping closer. "That Mafia trash. You are selling yourself to pay your mommy's bills. I know you. Ava, you are nothing without me." He reached for her, his hand clawing at her arm. "I need money, Ava, and you are going to get it from your sugar daddy." Ava opened her mouth to scream, but she didn't have to. Before Kyle's fingers could even close around her sleeve, two shadows detached themselves from the wall of the building. They moved with terrifying speed. One man, Dante's head of security, a giant named Marcus, grabbed Kyle by the back of his collar and yanked him backwards so hard his feet left the ground. The other man stepped between Ava and Kyle. "A human shield. Mister, Romano said you might be stupid enough to come back," Marcus said, his voice sounding like gravel in a mixer. Kyle thrashed, shouting obscenities. "Let me go! She owes me!" "Get him in the van." Marcus ordered the other guard. Ava stood frozen, shaking, as she watched them drag Kyle toward a black van idling at the curb. He was kicking and screaming, but they handled him like he was a bag of laundry. "Miss Miller," Marcus said, turning to her. His tone was polite, completely at odds with the violence he had just displayed. "The boss wants to see you. Now." He escorted her back up to the penthouse. Ava was trembling so hard her teeth chattered. When she entered the office, Dante was standing by the window, looking out at the city. He turned the moment she walked in. His face was a mask of cold, controlled fury. He crossed the room and stopped in front of her. He did not touch her, but his intensity wrapped around her. "Marcus tells me he put his hands on you," Dante said. "He tried," Ava whispered. Dante let out a breath that sounded like a hiss. He turned away, pacing a short circle before facing her again. "I need to know. Ava, I need to know everything. Now. Who is he? What did he do to you? And do not leave out a single detail to protect his miserable life." Ava looked at him. She saw the violence in his stance, but she also saw the desperate need to protect her. The dam broke. She told him. She told him about meeting Kyle 2 years ago, how charming he had been at first. She told him about the gambling debts he hid. She told him about the credit cards he stole from her purse. She told him about the night he threw a plate at her head because dinner was cold. She told him about the shame, the crushing, suffocating shame of loving someone who hurt her, and the fear that she deserved it. "I was so stupid," she choked out, tears streaming down her face. "I let him ruin everything. I am ashamed that I ever let him touch me." She buried her face in her hands, unable to look at Dante. Silence filled the room. Then she heard footsteps. Dante stopped directly in front of her. He reached out and took her hands, pulling them away from her face. He forced her to look at him. His eyes were burning with a fierce, terrifying light. "You have nothing to be ashamed of," he said, his voice ringing with absolute conviction. "He is a predator. You were surviving." Dante's jaw clenched, a muscle feathering in his cheek. He leaned in close, his voice dropping to a whisper that sounded like a vow carved in stone. "He will never touch you again. Ava, I promise you this. If he even breathes in your direction, I will burn his world to ash." Ava looked into his eyes and saw the truth there, for the first time in her life. She wasn't just being possessed, she was being protected. And as Dante's thumbs brushed away her tears, she realized with a jolt of terror and longing that she was falling in love with the monster who had saved her. The golden key felt heavy in Ava's palm, heavier than any piece of metal had a right to be. She stood in the center of the living room, staring out of the floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a view of the city skyline, a view that was startlingly similar to the one from Dante's office. Only a few blocks south. "This is temporary," Dante had told her, his voice brooking no argument, "until the situation with your ex stabilizes. But as Ava looked around the apartment, it did not feel temporary. It felt like a fortress. The building was owned by a shell company under the Romano umbrella. There was a doorman who looked more like a retired linebacker than a concierge. There was a keypad alarm system that required a 6-digit code, and downstairs, parked discreetly across the street, was a black sedan that never seemed to move. Ava set her box of books down on the quartz countertop. She was grateful, overwhelmingly so. Her mother was settled in a private care facility with round-the-clock nurses, paid for by the generous stipend Dante had written into her contract for the first time in years. Ava did not wake up wondering if the electricity would be cut off, yet a prickle of unease ran down her spine. She was safe, yes. But she was also kept. Her entire life, where she slept, where she worked, how she traveled, was now orchestrated by a man who commanded an army of shadows. She had traded the chaos of poverty for the gilded cage of Dante Romano's protection. The next morning, the black sedan was waiting for her. The driver, a man named Enzo with a neck as thick as a tree trunk, nodded respectfully as he held the door. "Good morning, Miss Miller." "Mr. Romano requested you be at the office by 8. Ava slid into the leather seat. She was learning that Mr. Romano's requests were rarely requests at all. However, inside the sleek, high-pressure environment of the top floor, the dynamic between them began to shift in ways that the contract could not have predicted. The terror she had initially felt in his presence was slowly being eroded by the small, quiet realities of spending 14 hours a day with another human being. She saw the way he rubbed the bridge of his nose when a negotiation stalled. She learned that he took his coffee black, but he had a secret weakness for the almond biscotti from the bakery on 4th Street, and he was watching her, too. One Tuesday afternoon, Ava was buried under a mountain of invoices, her eyes burning from staring at the screen. She had been working for 6 hours without a break. She heard the heavy oak door of the inner office open, but she did not look up, assuming he was heading out for a meeting. A moment later, a ceramic cup was placed gently on her desk, right next to her hand. Ava jumped, looking up. Dante was standing there, his suit jacket discarded, his shirt sleeves rolled up to his elbows, revealing powerful forearms. "Chamomile with honey," he said quietly. "You were rubbing your temples. You looked like you were about to collapse again." Ava stared at the steam rising from the mug. "You made me tea? I am capable of boiling water." "Ava," he replied, a dry amusement curling the corner of his mouth. "Drink it. Then take 20 minutes. That is an order." A week later, it was Ava who crossed the line. It was nearly 9 in the evening. Dante had been on calls with international partners since dawn. He looked gray with exhaustion. Ava ordered dinner from his favorite Italian bistro, and when it arrived, she didn't just leave it on his desk. She unpacked the containers, set out silverware, and practically forced him to stop working. "If you die of starvation, I am out of a job," she joked, her voice light but her eyes kind. "And I really like the dental plan." Dante looked at her, his fork hovering over the pasta. For a second, his guard dropped completely. He let out a laugh, a genuine, rusty sound that transformed his face, making him look 10 years younger and infinitely less dangerous. "We cannot have you losing the dental plan," he said, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "That would be a tragedy." These moments began to stitch them together. The car rides to meetings became less about reviewing files and more about quiet conversations. They joked about Enzo's driving. They debated the best pizza in the city. They were slipping, inch by inch, into something that felt perilously like a relationship, disguised as a job. Then came the invitation. It was a Friday. The city was battered by a cold November wind. Dante stopped by her desk as he was leaving. "Bring the quarterly reports to the penthouse tonight," he said. "We need to review the logistics for the merger." 7 o'clock. Ava arrived at his door at 7 sharp, a folder of spreadsheets clutched to her chest like a shield. She had spent too long choosing her outfit, a soft cream sweater and tailored trousers, and her heart was doing a nervous flutter in her throat. She knocked, and Dante opened the door. He was not wearing a suit. He was wearing dark jeans and a black t-shirt that clung to his chest. He was barefoot. The sight of the Mafia boss looking so casually human threw her off balance. "Come in," he said, stepping aside. The penthouse was breathtaking, a palace of glass and steel floating above the city lights. But what caught Ava's attention was the smell. Garlic, basil, and roasting tomatoes. "Are you cooking?" she asked, stepping into the foyer. "My nonna would roll over in her grave if she knew how much takeout I eat," Dante said, closing the door and locking it. "I decided to rectify that tonight. The reports can wait." He led her to the kitchen, a space that looked like it belonged in a culinary magazine. A pot was bubbling on the stove, and a bottle of red wine was breathing on the counter. "Sit," he instructed, pouring 2 glasses. They ate at the island counter, side by side. The pasta was simple but incredible, rich with flavor. The tension that usually governed their days at the office melted away with the wine. "I grew up in a house like a museum," Dante said, his voice low as he twirled his fork. "Everything was white. Everything was expensive, and we were not allowed to touch any of it. My father, he believed fear was the only way to teach respect. If I spilled a glass of milk, the punishment was severe." He took a sip of wine, his eyes distant. "I learned to be very quiet." He continued, "I learned to control everything around me so that nothing would spill." Ava watched him, her heart aching for the lonely boy he had been. It explained so much. The rigid control, the ice-cold mask. "I was the opposite," she confessed softly. "My house was loud, messy. We didn't have money, but we had noise, I think. I think that is why I stayed with Kyle for so long." Dante turned to look at her, his gaze intense. "Why?" "Because I was afraid of being the girl who made bad choices," she said, tracing the rim of her wine glass. "I wanted to prove I could fix him. I wanted to prove I wasn't a failure. I thought if I loved him enough, he would stop being angry. It sounds so stupid now." "It is not stupid," Dante said firmly. "It is hopeful. Hope is a dangerous thing, Ava, but it is not stupid." He reached for the bottle to refill her glass, and as he did, his shoulder brushed against hers. The contact was electric. A jolt of heat shot through Ava's arm, making her breath hitch. Dante froze, the bottle hovering in midair. He felt it too. The air in the kitchen suddenly became thick, charged with the unspoken things that had been building between them for weeks. He set the bottle down and cleared his throat. Standing up abruptly, "I should clean this up," he said, his voice a little rough. "I will help," Ava said, sliding off the stool. She carried the plates to the sink. Dante moved to put away the ingredients he had used to make the pasta from scratch. He reached into a cabinet above her head to put away a bag of flour. Ava turned around just as he stepped in close. He was right there. His chest was inches from her face. He had one hand braced on the counter behind her, effectively boxing her in. She looked up, her eyes wide, trapped in the circle of his warmth. Dante froze. He looked down at her, his gray eyes darkening, losing the professional detachment he fought so hard to maintain. He raised his free hand. Ava stopped breathing. "You have flour," he murmured. His thumb brushed her cheek, gentle as a feather. He wiped away a smudge of white powder she hadn't known was there, but he didn't pull his hand away. His fingers lingered, tracing the line of her jaw, his thumb resting near the corner of her mouth. Ava's lips parted. Her heart was hammering against her ribs so hard she was sure he could feel it. She saw his gaze drop to her mouth, then back up to her eyes, searching for permission, searching for a sign that he should stop. She didn't give him one. Instead, she leaned into his touch, her eyelids fluttering shut. Dante let out a low groan, a sound of surrender. He leaned down and captured her mouth. It wasn't a tentative first kiss. It was an outpouring. His lips were firm, warm, and demanding. He kissed her with a hunger that spoke of a man who had been starving for something he didn't know he needed. Ava gasped against his mouth, and he used the opening to deepen the kiss. His tongue swept against hers, tasting of wine and desire, her hands, acting of their own accord, reached up and curled into the soft cotton of his t-shirt, pulling him closer. She felt the hard wall of his chest press against her breasts. She felt the vibration of his ragged breathing. His hand moved from her face to the back of her neck, his fingers tangling in her hair, tilting her head back to give him better access. For a moment, the world outside the penthouse ceased to exist. There were no rivals, no debts, no medical bills. There was only Dante, his heat, his taste, and the overwhelming realization that she wanted him more than she had ever wanted anything. Then, just as quickly as it had begun, Dante tore himself away. He stepped back, his chest heaving, his eyes black with dilated pupils. He ran a hand through his hair, looking at her with a mixture of desire and horror. "I cannot do this," he rasped. Ava stood gripping the counter for support, her lips swollen and tingling. "Why?" she whispered. "Because look at me." "Ava," he said, his voice rising, "look at what I am. I am dragging you into the dark. Every minute you spend with me puts a target on your back. I promise to protect you, not consume you." He turned away, gripping the edge of the sink, his knuckles white. "You should go," he said, his voice flat and cold again. "The driver is downstairs." Ava stared at his back for a long moment. She wanted to argue. She wanted to tell him that she wasn't afraid of the dark if he was there. But the wall was back up. She grabbed her purse and fled the apartment, her body humming with a confused mix of elation and heartbreak. She touched her lips in the elevator, still tasting him. 2 days later, the target Dante feared became a reality. Down on the street level, hidden in the recess of a parking garage entrance, Kyle sat in a rented sedan that smelled of stale smoke. He held a phone with a cracked screen, zooming in on the photos he had taken over the last week. He had pictures of Eva entering the Romano headquarters. He had pictures of her getting into the black town car. And, most damning of all, he had a picture of her entering Dante's private apartment building at 7 in the evening and leaving late at night, looking disheveled and flustered. "Jackpot," Kyle muttered, his teeth gritted in a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He wasn't just angry, he was humiliated. The memory of Dante's men throwing him into the van burned in his gut like acid. He wanted to hurt Ava for leaving him. But more than that, he wanted to hurt the man who had taken her. He swiped to his contacts and dialed a number he had bought from a shady contact in a dive bar. Marco Leone answered on the second ring. "Who is this?" "I have something you want," Kyle said, his voice trembling slightly with adrenaline. "I have the girl. The Romano girl. And I have proof that he is weak for her." "Bring it," Marco said. Kyle met Marco's men in an alleyway behind a laundromat. He sold the photos for $5,000, a pitiful sum for a life, but enough to feed his vices. He told them everything, her schedule, her mother's clinic, the fact that Dante, the untouchable Ice King, was carrying a receptionist's books and cooking her dinner. But Kyle underestimated the reach of the Romano network. Dante's security team didn't just watch the streets, they watched the data. A low-level algorithm flagged a transfer of images involving Dante's face being sold on the black market. Within 3 hours, they had traced the source. The sun had set by the time the black van pulled up to an abandoned textile factory on the outskirts of the city, an off-site location the family used for conversations that could not be overheard. Inside, Kyle was zip-tied to a metal chair. He was sweating profusely, the $5,000 in his pocket feeling like lead. The metal door groaned open. Dante walked in. He was not wearing his suit jacket. He was rolling up his sleeves with slow, methodical precision. He did not look angry. He looked bored, which was infinitely more terrifying. Behind him, Marcus closed the door and locked it. "You are a persistent little insect, aren't you?" Dante said, his voice echoing in the empty space. Kyle shook his head, panic seizing his throat. "I didn't do anything, I swear!" Dante stopped in front of him. He looked down at the man who had bruised Ava's ribs. He looked at the man who was now selling her privacy to his enemies. "Marco Leone called me 10 minutes ago." Dante lied smoothly. "He told me you came to him. He told me you offered him my assistant on a silver platter." Kyle's face went white. Dante leaned in. I told you what would happen if you touched her again. Selling her out counts as touching her. The next 20 minutes were not pleasant. Dante did not lose control this time. He was surgical. He did not leave marks on the face. That was amateur hour. He focused on the body, on the fear. Sounds of heavy thuds and sharp cries echoed off the concrete walls. When it was over, Kyle was slumped in the chair, wheezing, tears and snot running down his face. He was broken, terrified, and desperate to say anything to make the pain stop. "She hates you," Kyle screamed, spitting blood onto the concrete floor. "You think she likes you? She is using you." Dante paused, wiping his hands on a rag Marcus had handed him. He stared at Kyle. "What did you say?" "She told me," Kyle lied, his voice shrill with hysteria. "She told me she was only doing it for the money. She said she was going to get close to you, find out where the money is, and then go to the police. She is laughing at you. Dante, she is a rat." Dante stood perfectly still. Logic told him Kyle was lying. Kyle was a desperate, vindictive ex-boyfriend trying to save his own skin. But Dante Romano had grown up in a world where betrayal was the only currency that never devalued. His father had been betrayed by his brother. His first love had sold him out to the feds. Paranoia was not just a habit, it was a survival mechanism. And Ava had been so perfect, so innocent, maybe too innocent. Was it possible? Was the stumbling, the fainting, the vulnerability all an act, a way to bypass his defenses? The seed of doubt, black and poisonous, planted itself in the fertile soil of his trauma. "Get him out of here," Dante said, his voice hollow. "Dump him at the county line. If he comes back to the city, kill him." He walked out of the warehouse into the cold night air. He took out his phone and looked at the message Ava had sent him an hour ago. "Thank you for the other night. I miss you." He stared at the words. Yesterday, they would have made his heart soar. Today, they looked like a trap. He put the phone away without replying. The next morning, the temperature in the office dropped 20 degrees. Ava arrived with a smile, carrying 2 coffees. She knocked on Dante's door and entered without waiting for a response. "Ready to joke about the weather? Here is your—" "Leave it," Dante said. He did not look up from his laptop. His voice was shards of ice. Ava froze. The warmth from the kitchen, the heat of the kiss, it was all gone. In its place was the terrifying stranger she had met in the lobby weeks ago. "Is everything okay?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I am busy." "Ava," Dante snapped, "go manage the schedule. That is what I pay you for." The words struck her like a slap. "That is what I pay you for." A reminder of her place, an employee, a charity case. Ava set the coffee down, her hands shaking. She backed out of the room, her chest tight with confusion and a sudden, sharp pain. For the next 3 days, it continued. He spoke to her only in commands. He canceled their shared lunches. He had Enzo drive her home and stayed late at the office alone. Ava felt like she had been punched in the gut. She didn't know about Kyle. She didn't know about the lie. She only knew that the man who had held her face and kissed her like she was the only woman in the world now looked at her as if she were a liability. She sat at her desk, staring at the closed door, wondering how she could miss someone who was sitting 20 feet away. And in the silence, she began to wonder if she had imagined the love in his eyes, or if she was just another fool falling for a man who could never truly let her in. The silence in the executive suite was louder than any shouting match could have been. For 3 days, the air between Ava Miller and Dante Romano had been thin and brittle, liable to snap at the slightest provocation. Since the night in the kitchen, the night of the pasta, the wine, and the kiss that had seared itself into Ava's memory, Dante had retreated behind a fortress of ice. He no longer looked her in the eye when he handed her files. He canceled the lunch orders she usually placed for 2, eating alone in his office with the door shut. When he did speak, his voice was clipped, professional, and entirely devoid of the warmth that had made her fall for him. Ava sat at her desk, staring at the closed mahogany door. Her chest ached with a dull, constant throb. She had convinced herself that the kiss meant something, that it was a promise of a new beginning. Now, the cold reality was setting in. He regretted it. To him, she was a mistake, a momentary lapse in judgment that he was now trying to correct by freezing her out. She felt foolish. She felt like the desperate girl Kyle had always told her she was, clinging to a man who saw her as a problem to be managed rather than a woman to be loved. Determined not to let him see her crumble, Ava opened a private tab on her browser. She pulled up her old resume. Her fingers trembled slightly as she typed, updating her employment history. She added executive assistant to the list of her skills, a bitter irony tasting like copper in her mouth. She began searching for administrative positions in other cities, places far away from the Harbor Crest Hotel, far away from the Romano Syndicate, and far away from the gray eyes that had looked at her with such intense desire only to turn away. I will not be a burden, she told herself, forcing back the sting of tears. I will work until I have enough for a deposit on a safe apartment for Mom, and then I will disappear. While Ava planned her exit, her enemies were planning her capture. Kyle had not left the city as he was told. He was hiding in a cheap motel on the fringes of the industrial district, nursing his bruised ego and his literal bruises. His hatred for Dante Romano had curdled into a poisonous obsession, but his hatred for Ava, for what he saw as her betrayal, was even stronger. He sat with Marco Leone in a smoke-filled back room of a gambling den, laying out a map of the city. He is guarding her like a vault. Marco spat, tossing a cigarette butt onto the floor. 2 guards at her apartment, a driver, cameras. We cannot touch her without starting a war we are not ready to fight. Kyle shook his head, a nasty grin spreading across his face. Not always. I know her routine. I know her mother. He pointed to a location on the map. Every Thursday, she takes her mother to the specialist. That is heavily guarded, but twice a month, on Tuesdays. She goes to a small clinic across town for blood work. It is a quick trip. She tells the security team to stay back because her mother gets anxious around the men in suits. She tries to keep her mother from knowing how dangerous her life has become. That is her weak spot. Marco looked at the map, then at Kyle. Tuesday is today. The afternoon was heavy with gray clouds that hung low over the city. Threatening rain. The air was thick and humid. Ava helped her mother, Martha, out of the clinic doors. Martha was frail but in good spirits, chatting happily about the nurses. Ava scanned the street. Enzo, the driver, was parked around the corner, respecting her request to keep the heavy security presence out of her mother's direct line of sight. It was a small mercy she tried to grant the older woman. I think the new medication is working, Martha said, leaning on Ava's arm. I feel stronger today. Honey, that is good. Mom, Ava said, forcing a smile. Her mind was still on the job applications she had sent out during her lunch break. They reached the curb. Ava raised her hand to signal Enzo. Suddenly, a white van screeched around the corner, hopping the curb with a jarring crunch of metal. Before Ava could react, the side door slid open. 2 men in ski masks jumped out. They moved with terrifying speed. One of them shoved Martha. It wasn't a brutal hit, but it was enough to send the frail woman stumbling backward. She fell onto the sidewalk, crying out in shock. "Mom!" Ava screamed, turning to reach for her. A hand clamped over Ava's mouth, an arm hooked around her waist, lifting her feet off the ground. She kicked and clawed, digging her nails into the man's leather jacket, but he was too strong. They threw her into the back of the van like a sack of flour. "No!" Ava shrieked, the sound muffled by the gloved hand. The door slammed shut, plunging her into darkness. The van tires squealed as the driver floored the accelerator, tearing away from the clinic just as Enzo came running around the corner, his gun drawn but seconds too late. On the sidewalk, Martha sat uninjured but shaking violently, screaming her daughter's name into the uncaring gray sky. High above the city, in the Romano headquarters, Dante was reviewing a contract. He was trying to focus on the numbers, trying to drown out the memory of Ava's hurt expression when he had dismissed her earlier. He told himself he was doing the right thing. He was protecting her. Pushing her away was the only way to keep her safe from the violence that followed him like a shadow. His phone buzzed. It was the emergency line, the ringtone he hoped never to hear. He answered it before the first ring finished. Report, boss. Enzo's voice was ragged, breathless. They took her. The world stopped. The ambient noise of the air conditioning, the hum of the city outside, the beat of his own heart, it all vanished into a vacuum of absolute silence. Say that again, Dante said, Vran. His voice was a dead thing. A van. 2 men. Outside the clinic. I was 10 seconds away. I have the plate number, but it is likely stolen. They headed east toward the docks. Dante stood up. The chair he had been sitting in was heavy leather. Expensive and solid, he shoved it backward with such force that it tipped over and crashed to the floor. Find her! Dante roared, the control he had spent a lifetime perfecting. The icy mask he wore to rule the underworld, shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces. He swept his arm across his desk. Laptops, lamps, and stacks of files went flying, crashing against the far wall. The sound of breaking glass echoed through the suite. He grabbed his phone again, his fingers gripping the device hard enough to crack the screen. He dialed his head of security. Get everyone, Dante ordered. His voice was not a shout anymore. It was a low, terrifying growl that promised death. I want every soldier, every associate, every street corner watcher. Close the bridges, block the tunnels. If a fly leaves this city without my permission, I will execute you myself. Find her. He strode out of his office, ignoring the stunned looks of his staff. He did not care about the business. He did not care about the truce with the other families. He did not care if he burned the entire city to the ground. They had Ava. And if they hurt her, there would be no place on earth far enough for them to hide. The warehouse smelled of rust, seawater, and old oil. It was a cavernous, rotting structure near the abandoned shipping yards. Ava was tied to a wooden chair in the center of the room. Her wrists were bound behind her back with plastic zip ties that dug into her skin, cutting off her circulation. Her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird, but she refused to cry. She looked up at the 2 men standing over her. One was Marco Leone, a man with a face like a clenched fist. The other was Kyle. Kyle looked manic. He was pacing back and forth, holding a gun that looked too big for his hand. I told you, Marco said, leaning down so his face was inches from Ava's. He had bad breath and dead eyes. You are just a pet to him. A toy he plays with when he is bored. Do you really think he is going to trade his empire for a receptionist? Ava glared at him. She was terrified. Her hands were shaking uncontrollably behind her back, but amidst the fear, there was a cold, hard kernel of anger. He's not coming for me, she said, her voice trembling but clear, because I am nothing to him. So you wasted your time. Marco laughed. It was a dry, hacking sound. Oh, he is coming. We sent him a picture of you, and when he gets here, you are going to help us. He pulled a knife from his belt. He didn't cut her, but he ran the flat of the blade along her cheek. You know his codes, Marco said. You manage his schedule. You know where he keeps his private accounts. Tell me the access codes to the offshore hold, and maybe I will let you walk out of here. Ava pressed her lips together. She knew the codes. She had organized the files herself. She knew enough to dismantle Dante's entire operation. Tell him, Ava! Hell, Kyle shouted from the shadows. Don't be stupid. He doesn't love you. Ava looked at Kyle. She saw the pathetic, small man she had wasted years on, and then she thought of Dante. She thought of the way he had caught her when she fainted. She thought of the tea he made her. She thought of the way he had wiped the flour from her cheek, as if she were something precious. Even if he didn't love her, even if he had pushed her away, he had saved her life. He had saved her mother. She would not pay him back with betrayal. I don't know anything, Ava said, staring Marco in the eye. I just answer the phones. Marco's face darkened. He raised his hand and struck her across the face. The blow snapped her head to the side. Ava tasted blood. Her cheek stung fiercely, but she didn't make a sound. She turned back to face him, spitting blood onto the concrete floor. Go to hell, she whispered. Marco raised his hand again, his face twisting in fury. Suddenly, a sound ripped through the warehouse. It was the screech of metal tearing against metal as the main bay doors were rammed by a heavy vehicle. Gunfire erupted instantly. It wasn't the pop, pop, pop of movies. It was deafening. thunderous cracks that echoed off the metal walls. Dante's men poured into the warehouse like a tide of black ink. Marco spun around, raising his weapon, but he was too slow. Dante Romano entered through the smoke and debris. He was not wearing armor. He was wearing his dress shirt, the sleeves rolled up, a gun in each hand. He moved with the terrifying precision of a reaper. He dropped two of Marco's guards before they could even aim. Marco grabbed Ava, hauling her chair backward, pressing the knife to her throat. "Stop!" Marco screamed. "Back off or I open her throat." The gunfire ceased instantly. Silence fell over the warehouse. Heavy and suffocating, Dante stopped. He stood 20 feet away. His chest was heaving. His eyes were wild, fixed on the blade pressed against Ava's skin. "Let her go," Dante said. His voice was unrecognizable. It was raw, stripped of all humanity. "You step back," Marco yelled, his hand shaking. "You sign over the territories. Now." Dante looked at Ava. He saw the bruise forming on her cheek. He saw the blood on her lip. Something inside him broke. He didn't negotiate. He didn't step back. He raised his right hand and fired a single shot. It was a risk that no sane man would take, but Dante was not sane in that moment. The bullet struck Marco in the shoulder, shattering the bone. Marco screamed, his arm jerking back, the knife falling from his useless hand, and Dante was on him before the knife hit the floor. He tackled Marco, driving him into the concrete. He didn't shoot him again. He used his fists. One blow, two blows. "Dante!" Ava screamed. The sound of her voice pierced through the red haze of his rage. Dante froze, his fist raised. He looked at Marco, who was unconscious and bleeding. Then he looked at Ava. He scrambled off Marco and rushed to her. His hands, usually so steady, were shaking violently as he holstered his weapon and pulled a knife from his pocket to cut the zip ties. He sliced through the plastic and threw the restraints aside. "Ava," he gasped, pulling her out of the chair. She fell into him, and he caught her, wrapping his arms around her with a force that knocked the wind out of her. He buried his face in her neck, inhaling the scent of her fear and her skin. "I have you," he choked out. "I have you." He pulled back, his hands cupping her face, his thumbs smearing the blood on her lip as he checked her frantically. "Did they hurt you? Where are you hurt? Look at me. I am okay," Ava sobbed, clutching the front of his shirt. "I am okay." Dante pulled her into his chest again, holding her so tight it felt like he was trying to merge their bodies into one. He was trembling. The great Dante Romano, the man who terrified the city, was shaking in her arms. The ride back to the penthouse was a blur of speed and silence. Dante did not let go of her hand. He didn't speak. He just held on, his grip bruising as if he feared she would evaporate if he loosened his hold for a second. When they reached the penthouse, he carried her inside, kicking the door shut behind them. He took her straight to the master bedroom. "Sit," he said gently, placing her on the edge of the bed. He disappeared into the bathroom and returned with a warm, damp cloth. He knelt before her, between her legs, just as he had done in the office during the blackout. But this time, there was no professional barrier. He gently wiped the blood from her lip. He cleaned the dirt from her cheek. His touch was agonizingly tender, a stark contrast to the violence he had just unleashed in the warehouse. "I am sorry," he whispered. The words sounded like they were being torn from his throat. "I am so sorry. Ava." "It wasn't my fault," Ava said softly, wincing as the cloth touched a sore spot. "It was..." He insisted, his eyes squeezed shut. I thought if I pushed you away, you would be safe. I thought if I made you hate me, you would leave, and the darkness wouldn't touch you. I was arrogant. I was stupid." He dropped the cloth and rested his forehead against her knees. "I almost got you killed because I was too much of a coward to admit that I need you." Ava looked down at him. She saw the vulnerability in the curve of his spine. She reached out and ran her fingers through his dark hair. "You didn't get me killed," she said. "You came for me. Marco said you wouldn't. He said I was just a pet." Dante looked up. His eyes were red-rimmed, burning with intensity. "You are my life, Ava," he said, the truth of it ringing in the quiet room. You are the only clean thing I have, the only thing I have ever wanted for myself. Ava felt the tears spill over. I was so scared, Dante. Not just of Marco. I am scared of your world. I am scared that one day you won't get there in time. I know, he said, reaching up to hold her hand against his cheek. I know. And I cannot promise you that it will be easy, but I promise you this. I will burn the world down before I let anyone hurt you again. I will never push you away again. They looked at each other, the air thick with the trauma of the day and the undeniable pull of their connection. Ava leaned down. I don't want to leave, she whispered. I want to stay with you. Dante let out a shuddering breath. He rose to his knees, bringing his face level with hers. He kissed her. It wasn't like the first kiss in the kitchen. This was desperate, claiming, filled with the terror of nearly losing her. He eased her back onto the mattress. She pulled him down with her, needing the weight of him to ground her, to prove that she was alive and safe. Dante shed his shirt, revealing a torso marked with old scars. He stopped, hovering over her, his eyes tracing the fresh bruise on her cheek, then moving down to the yellowing marks on her ribs from weeks ago. He reached out and traced the old bruises with his fingertips, his touch reverent. He kissed the skin there, a silent apology for every hurt she had ever endured. You are so beautiful, he murmured against her skin, and you are so brave. Ava arched into his touch, her hands exploring the muscles of his back. She felt the tension leaving him, replaced by a fierce, protective heat. Make me forget, she whispered, pulling him up to kiss her lips. Make me forget everything but you. Dante complied. He loved her with a slow, deliberate intensity, worshipping her body with his hands and his mouth. There was no rush, no roughness. It was a reclaiming. In the safety of the penthouse, high above the city that wanted to destroy them, they stripped away the fear and the violence, leaving only the raw, honest truth of two people who had found their sanctuary in each other. As the night deepened, wrapped in his arms and his sheets, Ava finally stopped shaking. She fell asleep listening to the steady, strong beat of Dante's heart, knowing that for the first time in her life, she was completely, irrevocably safe. The morning sun sliced through the heavy velvet curtains of the penthouse master bedroom, painting stripes of gold across the high thread count sheets. Ava Miller woke slowly, drifting up from the deepest sleep she had experienced in years. For the first time in her memory, she did not wake up with a knot of anxiety in her stomach about unpaid bills or looming threats. She felt a heavy warmth draped over her waist. Shifting slightly, she realized it was Dante's arm. He was asleep beside her, his face turned toward the pillow, the harsh lines of stress that usually bracketed his mouth smoothed away by rest. In the quiet light of dawn, he did not look like the ruthless head of the Romano crime family. He looked like a man who had finally found a moment of peace. Ava watched him for a long time, her heart swelling with a mixture of tenderness and disbelief. The events of the previous night, the kidnapping, the warehouse, the violence, and the desperate, healing intimacy that followed, felt like a fever dream, but the solid weight of his arm was real. She reached out, her fingers hovering over his shoulder, wanting to touch him, to confirm that this safety was not an illusion. Dante stirred. His eyes opened, instantly alert, shedding sleep in a fraction of a second. When his gaze landed on her, the tension in his shoulders dropped. He pulled her closer, burying his face in the crook of her neck, inhaling deeply. "Stay," he murmured against her skin, his voice rough with sleep. "Just stay right here." For an hour, the world outside did not exist. There was only the warmth of the bed, the slow rhythm of their breathing, and the silent promise of a new beginning. Ava allowed herself to imagine a future where they could be like this every morning, normal, safe, and together. But the world outside the penthouse wasn't sleeping. It was sharpening its knives. The bubble burst at 9 o'clock. A sharp, rhythmic knocking on the bedroom door shattered the silence. Dante froze. He sat up. the tenderness vanishing from his eyes, replaced instantly by the cold, calculating look Ava had seen in the lobby weeks ago. He reached for the handgun on the nightstand before calling out, "What is it?" "It is Luca, boss." A muffled voice came through the wood. "We have a situation, a code-red situation," Dante cursed under his breath. He looked at Ava, his expression guarded. "I have to take this. Stay here. Do not go near the windows." He dressed quickly, pulling on trousers and a fresh shirt, buttoning it with mechanical precision. He did not kiss her goodbye. He simply walked out, closing the door with a definitive click, in the living room. Luca, the Romano family's consigliere, was pacing. Luca was a man of 50, with silver hair and eyes that had seen too much blood to be impressed by anything. He held a tablet in his hand, his knuckles white. "You made a mess." "Dante," Luca said without preamble. Dante poured himself a black coffee, his back to his advisor. "I got her back. That is all that matters." "Is it?" Luca threw the tablet onto the marble coffee table. It slid across the surface, stopping inches from Dante's hip. The warehouse assault was loud. Police received 3 anonymous calls. But that is the least of our problems. The commission is in an uproar. You took personal assets into a tactical situation. You expose the network for a girl who is not even family. "She is family to me," Dante said, his voice low and dangerous. Luca stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Listen to me, Dante. You are the Don, but you are not a king. You serve the interests of the syndicate. Marco Leone is telling everyone who will listen that you are compromised. He's saying you are weak, that a receptionist has you wrapped around her finger. The rival families smell blood in the water. They are saying Ava is a liability." Dante slammed his coffee cup down, the ceramic cracking. "Let them talk. I will handle them." "You cannot handle a war on 4 fronts," Luca snapped. "The message from the top is clear. You need to cut the cord, distance yourself. If she stays in your bed, she dies. If not by Marco, then by our own people to correct your judgment. You have to let her go, Dante, or you are signing her death warrant." Dante stood frozen, the blood draining from his face. The brutal logic of his world crashed down on him, suffocating the hope he had allowed himself to feel that morning. He looked toward the bedroom door. He could save her, or he could have her. He could not do both. The shift happened gradually over the next 3 days, but to Ava, it felt like a physical blow. After that morning, Dante did not return to the bedroom. When she finally emerged, he was gone. Enzo drove her not to her apartment nor to the hotel, but to a high-security complex on the edge of the city. "It is a safe house. Miss Miller," Enzo explained, avoiding her eyes in the rearview mirror. "Mr. Romano says it is best for you to stay here until things cool down." The apartment was luxurious, but it was sterile. Gray walls, modern furniture that looked like it had never been sat on, and windows that didn't open. It was a cage. Dante did not visit. He did not call. When she tried to reach him, his assistant routed her to voicemail. When she finally saw him at the office 2 days later, the temperature in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees. "Mr. Romano," Ava began, stepping into his office. She had dressed carefully, wearing the necklace he had given her, hoping to spark some recognition of what they had shared. Dante did not look up from his paperwork. "Miss Miller, I have arranged for your mother's transfer to a facility in Ohio. It is specialized, very secure." "Ohio?" Ava asked, stunned. "Why would I move her to Ohio?" "Because it is far away from here," Dante said, his voice flat, "and you will be going with her. I have prepared a severance package. It is substantial. It will support you both for 5 years. Ava felt like the floor had opened up beneath her. Severance package. Dante, what are you talking about? 2 nights ago you held me while I cried. You said I was your life. Dante finally looked up. His eyes were dead. There was no light in them, no warmth, just a hard, impenetrable wall of gray. That was a mistake, he said. Ava recoiled as if he had slapped her. A mistake? I was running on adrenaline, Dante said, standing up and walking to the window, putting his back to her. The situation was extreme. Emotions were high. I allowed myself to be unprofessional. It cannot continue. Unprofessional? Ava's voice rose, trembling with hurt and rising anger. "You kissed me. You made love to me. You told me you would burn the world down for me, and now I am putting the fire out," Dante shouted. Spinning around, the outburst shocked them both. Dante breathed heavily. His hands clenched into fists at his sides. He looked at her, and for a second the mask slipped. She saw the torture in his eyes, the desperate, clawing fear, but he clamped it down instantly. "You are a liability, Ava," he said, his voice dropping to a cruel, clipped whisper. "My enemies are using you to get to me. My own people are questioning my leadership because of you. I cannot afford to be weak, and you make me weak." Ava stared at him, tears welling in her eyes. She wanted to scream at him. She wanted to shake him, but his words were like iron bars slamming shut between them. "So that is it," she whispered. "You choose the power. You choose the crime. I choose survival," Dante said. "Yours and mine. Go to the safe house. Pack your things. You leave for Ohio on Friday." Ava turned and walked out. She held her head high, but inside, she was shattering. While Dante tried to build a wall to protect Ava, Marco Leone was busy digging a tunnel underneath it. Marco had survived the warehouse with a shattered shoulder and a thirst for vengeance that consumed him. He knew he couldn't beat Dante in a straight fight. The Romano family was too strong, but he could destroy Dante's reputation. From his hospital bed in a private, off-the-books clinic, Marco began leaking documents. He sent photos of Dante entering the warehouse with guns drawn to the local news stations. He sent financial records linking the Harbor Crest Hotel to shell companies used for money laundering to the FBI. And he sent a specific package to the local police precinct, a package that placed Ava Miller at the center of the criminal conspiracy. On Thursday afternoon, Detective Thorne walked into the lobby of the Harbor Crest Hotel. He was a man who looked like he slept in his cheap suit, with a face carved from cynicism. Ava was back at the front desk. She had refused to stay in the safe house, defying Dante's orders. If he was going to fire her, he would have to do it to her face. She needed the normalcy of work to keep from falling apart. "Ava Miller?" Detective Thorne asked, flashing a badge. Ava froze. "Yes, we need to have a little chat." He didn't arrest her. He leaned over the counter, blocking her view of the lobby. He pulled a manila envelope from his jacket and slid a photo across the marble. It was grainy, taken from a long-distance lens. It showed Ava being carried out of the warehouse by Dante. It looked intimate. It looked incriminating. "We know you were there," Thorne said, his voice low, "and we know about the boyfriend, Kyle. We know he is missing." Ava's heart hammered against her ribs. "I don't know where Kyle is." "We think you do," Thorne said. "We think Dante Romano got rid of him for you. That makes you an accessory to murder, Miss Miller. Unless—" He paused, letting the threat hang in the air. "Unless you help us. We know Romano is the big fish. You are just the bait. You cooperate. You tell us where the bodies are buried, and maybe we can keep your mother out of this. It would be a shame if we had to bring a sick woman in for questioning regarding her medical payments being funded by mob money." Ava felt sick. The threat to her mother was a cold blade to the gut. "I have nothing to say to you," she whispered. Thorne smiled. It was not a nice smile. "You will. You have until tomorrow to think about it. Here is my card. Call me before we have to come for you with handcuffs." That night, the office was dark. Dante was sitting alone in the gloom, staring at a glass of whiskey he hadn't touched. The door opened. He knew it was her before she spoke. He knew the sound of her footsteps. "I told you to go to the safe house," he said, not turning around. "The police were at the hotel today." Ava said. Her voice was steady, but he could hear the tremor underneath. Dante spun his chair around so fast it nearly tipped over. "What? A detective?" "Thorne. He showed me pictures of the warehouse. He said they would bring my mother in for questioning if I didn't testify against you." Dante moved. He was across the room in a blur of motion. He didn't stop until he was inches from her. The fear he had been suppressing for days exploded out of him, hot and blinding. "Did you talk to them?" he demanded, gripping her shoulders. "Did you say anything?" "No," Ava cried, wincing at the strength of his grip. "Of course not." Dante let out a sound that was half growl, half sob. He released her shoulders and slammed his hand against the wall beside her head, trapping her. He loomed over her, his breathing ragged, his eyes wild. "They are closing in," he muttered, looking at her as if he wanted to devour her and hide her inside his own chest. "Marco is leaking everything. The police, the feds, the rivals, they are all coming for you because of me." He looked down at her face. He traced the line of her jaw with a shaking hand. "I cannot protect you from the law. Ava, I can stop bullets, but I cannot stop this. You have to leave. You have to disappear. I won't leave you," Ava said, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I love you, Dante." The confession broke him. Dante groaned, a sound of pure defeat. He crashed his mouth down on hers. It was not a gentle kiss. It was a desperate, terrifying collision. He kissed her like a man facing the gallows, trying to memorize the taste of the only sweet thing he had ever known. He pressed her against the wall, his body hard and unyielding, his hands tangling in her hair, pulling her closer, deeper. Ava responded with equal desperation, her hands clutching his lapels, trying to anchor him. She tasted the whiskey and the fear on his tongue. For a moment, there was no police, no Marco, no Ohio, just the two of them, burning in the wreckage of his empire. Then, Dante tore himself away. He stumbled back, his chest heaving. He looked at her, lips swollen, eyes shining, and he looked like a man who had just cut out his own heart. "Get out," he rasped. "Dante, go!" he roared, the sound echoing off the glass walls. "I have a jet waiting at the private airfield. Enzo will take you. You fly to Europe tonight. New identity, new life. You never look back." He turned his back on her, gripping the edge of his desk until his knuckles turned white. "If you stay, you go to prison, or you die. I will not watch either happen. Go." Ava stood there for a long minute, watching his back. She realized then that he would never stop pushing her away as long as the threat existed, as long as Marco had leverage, as long as the evidence existed. Dante would destroy his own happiness to keep her safe. She wiped her tears. Her expression hardened. "Okay," she said softly. "I will go." Dante's shoulders slumped, a mixture of relief and agony. "Goodbye, Ava." He didn't turn around. He couldn't. Ava walked out of the office. She walked to the elevator, but she didn't push the button for the lobby. She didn't call Enzo. She walked out of the service exit and hailed a taxi. She was not going to Europe. She was not going to run. Dante was trying to save her by sacrificing himself, but two could play at that game. She pulled her phone out. Her hands were shaking, but her resolve was steel. She scrolled through her blocked numbers until she found it. Kyle. She knew he was desperate. She knew he was a coward. If Marco was leaking information, he had likely gotten it from Kyle. And if Kyle had the evidence, maybe she could buy it. Maybe she could destroy it before the police got the rest of it. She dialed the number. It rang 4 times. "Hello?" Kyle's voice was cracked. Suspicious. "It is me," Ava said. Ava?" Kyle laughed, a nervous, jittery sound. "Calling to gloat?" "I am calling to make a deal," Ava said, staring out at the passing city lights. "I have money, Kyle." Dante gave me a severance package. $50,000. Cash. There was a silence on the other end. Greed was a powerful motivator. $50,000? Kyle asked. "I will give it all to you." Ava lied. "But I want the originals. The photos, the recordings, everything you gave to Marco. I want it all destroyed." "Where?" Kyle asked instantly. "The old shipyard. Pier 4, tonight, 1 hour. "Done," Kyle said, and the line went dead. Ava lowered the phone. She felt a cold calm settle over her. She would fix this. She would clear Dante's name, or at least remove the evidence that linked him to the warehouse. She would prove that she wasn't a liability. She was a partner. She directed the taxi driver to the bank, withdrawing as much cash as her daily limit allowed and stuffing it into an envelope with stacks of blank paper to make it look thick. She arrived at the shipyard under the cover of darkness. The air smelled of salt and rot. Pier 4 was desolate, illuminated by a single flickering streetlight. She saw a figure standing by the rusted railing. Kyle, Ava stepped out of the taxi and told the driver to wait. She walked toward him, clutching her purse. "I have the money," she called out, her voice echoing in the emptiness. Kyle turned. He smiled, and for a second, Ava thought it was going to be easy. But she didn't see the shadows moving behind the shipping containers. She didn't know that Kyle was not alone. She didn't know that Marco Leone had anticipated this move, that he had men watching Kyle's phone, watching the hotel, waiting for the girl to make a mistake. Ava walked forward, holding out the envelope, stepping blindly into the final trap. The abandoned textile factory sat on the edge of the river like a rotting carcass, its hollow windows staring out into the black water. The air here was thick with the smell of wet rust, decaying wood, and the chemical tang of old industry. It was a place where the city dumped its secrets, hoping they would wash away with the tide. Ava stepped out of the taxi a block away, clutching her purse against her chest. The envelope inside felt heavy, not just with the stacks of paper she had cut to size, but with the weight of her own terrifying gamble. She told the driver to leave. Ignoring his concerned look, there was no turning back now. She navigated the broken pavement toward the main entrance. The wind whipped her hair across her face, stinging her eyes, but she did not blink. She was done being the victim. She was done waiting for men to decide her fate. Kyle was waiting for her under the flickering yellow light of a single bulb that buzzed angrily overhead. He looked jittery, shifting his weight from foot to foot, his eyes darting into the shadows. When he saw her, a look of greedy relief washed over his pale features. "You came," he said, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. "You actually came. I told you I would," Ava said, stopping 10 feet away. Her voice was steady, colder than the wind off the river. "I have the money, $50,000, just like you asked." Kyle licked his lips. "Let me see it. First, the files," Ava demanded, "the photos, the recordings, everything you gave to Marco." Kyle reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick manila folder. He waved it in the air like a trophy. "It is all here. Every picture of you and your Mafia boyfriend playing house. Every recording of his men threatening me. This destroys him. Ava, this puts him away for life." Ava stared at the folder. It was the key to Dante's freedom. It was the only thing standing between him and a prison cell. "Hand it over," she said, reaching into her bag and pulling out the thick envelope. They stepped toward each other. The exchange was almost comical in its tension, the desperate ex-boyfriend and the woman who had outgrown him. Kyle snatched the envelope from her hand, tearing the corner to peek inside. He saw the flash of real currency she had placed at the front. "You are stupid, Ava," he laughed, clutching the money to his chest. "You really think he loves you? He's a monster. I am doing you a favor by taking this money. I am not the one who is stupid, Kyle," Ava said, gripping the folder. Before Kyle could retort, the shadows behind him moved. "Nice try, kids," a voice grated from the darkness. Ava gasped as 3 men stepped out from behind the rusted pillars. At the center was Marco Leone. His arm was in a sling, and his face was bruised from the beating Dante had given him, but his eyes were alive with malicious triumph. "Marco?" Kyle stammered, stepping back. "What are you doing here? We had a deal. I get the cash, you get the leverage. Plans change," Marco said, signaling his men. 2 of the thugs moved with practiced efficiency. One kicked Kyle behind the knees, sending him crashing to the concrete. The envelope of money skittered across the floor, spilling blank paper into the dirt. "Hey, this is fake," the thug shouted. Kyle looked at the paper, then at Ava, betrayal written all over his face. "You lied to me, and you are useless to me." Marco spat. He turned his gaze to Ava. "Grab her." Ava tried to run, but she didn't make it 2 steps. A heavy hand clamped onto her arm, twisting it painfully behind her back. She cried out as she was shoved forward, stumbling until she was forced against a rusted metal support beam. "Tie her up," Marco ordered, "and him too. This wasn't supposed to happen," Kyle screamed as he was dragged next to Ava. "You said I could walk. You are a witness." "You idiot," Marco sneered, walking over to inspect them. "And she is the grand finale." Marco pulled a gun from his waistband. He looked at Ava. his eyes gleaming with a sick satisfaction. "I am going to use you one last time, sweetheart. I already tipped off the police. They are on their way here right now. They are going to find a dead informant, that is you, Kyle, and a dead girl. And they are going to find evidence that Dante Romano killed you both to silence you." Ava's blood ran cold. It was a perfect frame-up. Dante would go down for 2 murders he didn't commit, on top of the racketeering charges Marco had already fabricated. "You will never get away with this," Ava whispered, testing the ropes that bound her wrists to the beam. "I already have." Marco smiled, high above the city, in the digital nerve center of the Romano penthouse. A red alert flashed on the screen. Dante was pacing the floor, his mind racing with a dozen different exit strategies for Ava, when his head of security, Marcus, burst into the room. "Boss, we intercepted a signal," Marcus said, his face pale. "We hacked Kyle's cloud account to delete the backups. We found a location ping. He's at the old textile factory by the river." Dante stopped pacing. "Why is he there?" Marcus hesitated. "Because Miss Miller is there. We pulled a text message log. She arranged a meeting with him an hour ago." The world tilted on its axis. Dante felt a physical blow to his chest, harder than any bullet. "She went alone?" he whispered, the horror of it crashing over him. "She tried to buy the evidence." Marcus said, "She's trying to protect you." Dante didn't speak. He didn't think. He moved on pure instinct. The guilt was a corrosive acid in his veins. He had pushed her away to keep her safe, and instead, he had driven her straight into the lion's den. "Get the car!" Dante roared, sprinting for the elevator, "and tell the crew to meet us there. If a single hair on her head is touched, I will kill everyone in this city." As the elevator plummeted toward the garage, Dante checked his phone. His police scanner app was lighting up. Dispatch was sending units to the river. Shots fired. Hostage situation reported. "Marco," Dante snarled, realizing the trap. He had minutes, maybe seconds. The factory was a chaotic symphony of noise. Outside, the wail of sirens cut through the night. Red and blue lights flashed against the broken windows, illuminating the grim interior in strobes of color. Inside, the tension was at a breaking point. Marco was pacing, checking his watch. "Where is he?" he muttered. "He should be here." "I am here." Dante's voice thundered from the upper catwalk. Marco spun around, raising his gun. Dante stood on the rusted metal walkway 20 feet above them. He was a silhouette against the flashing police lights outside. He held a rifle, but he didn't fire. He couldn't. Marco was standing directly in front of Ava, using her body as a shield. "Drop the weapon, Marco!" Dante shouted, his voice echoing off the steel walls. "The police are outside! It is over! It is over when I say it is over!" Marco screamed back, pressing the barrel of his gun against Ava's temple. Ava squeezed her eyes shut, a tear leaking out. She could feel the cold metal against her skin. She could hear Dante's heavy breathing from the catwalk. "Don't do it, Dante," she screamed. "Get out of here! It is a trap!" Dante didn't move. He looked down at the woman he loved, tied to a beam, a gun to her head, surrounded by enemies, with the law pounding at the doors. His control was hanging by a single, fraying thread. "Come down, Dante," Marco taunted. "Come down and die like a man, or watch her die like a dog." Dante lowered the rifle slowly. He raised his hands. "I am coming down," he said calmly. "Just don't hurt her." He walked down the metal stairs, his hands visible. His men had infiltrated the ground floor, hidden in the shadows of the machinery, but they were in a standoff. Marco's men had their guns trained on Ava and Kyle. It was a stalemate. Dante reached the ground floor. He walked until he was 10 feet away from Marco. "Let them go," Dante said. "This is between you and me." "No," Marco grinned, his eyes manic. "This is about destroying you, and watching you break is the best part." He cocked the hammer of the gun pressed to Ava's head. Ava looked at Dante. She saw the agony in his eyes. She saw him tensing, ready to throw his life away in a hopeless lunge, and then she remembered, months ago, on a quiet drive home. Dante had pointed out this factory. "I used to hide in the old control room when my father was on a rampage." He had told her, "There is a main breaker behind the north pillar. It controls the emergency fire suppression system. It is loud as hell." Ava shifted her eyes. She was tied to the north pillar, directly behind her right shoulder. She could feel a metal box jutting out. She looked at Dante. She tried to signal him with her eyes. "Be ready." Marco laughed, distracted by Dante's surrender. "You are weak, Romano. You always were." Ava took a deep breath. She slammed her body backward with every ounce of strength she possessed. Her shoulder collided with the rusted lever of the breaker box. She threw her weight down, dragging the handle with her. Clang! A massive spark showered down from the ceiling as the ancient system short-circuited. An ear-splitting industrial siren roared to life, deafening in the enclosed space. "What the—" Marco flinched, instinctively ducking away from the sparks. It was a split second. It was enough. Dante moved faster than thought. He lunged forward, closing the distance in 2 strides. He didn't go for his gun. He went for Marco's wrist. He grabbed Marco's hand, twisting it upward. The gun went off, a bullet slamming harmlessly into the ceiling. Dante drove his shoulder into Marco's chest, tackling him to the concrete. The impact knocked the wind out of Marco. The gun scattered across the floor. Dante was on top of him instantly. His hands found Marco's throat. The rage that had been building for weeks, the terror of losing Ava, the frustration of his life, it all poured into his grip. "Die!" Dante roared, his thumbs pressing into Marco's windpipe. Marco clawed at Dante's face, his eyes bulging, face turning purple. "Dante!" Ava screamed over the siren. "Dante, stop! Don't do it!" Dante froze. His breathing was ragged. He looked down at the man beneath him. He could end it right here. He could snap Marco's neck and be done with the threat forever. But then he looked up. He saw Ava. She was safe, but she was looking at him with pleading eyes. "If you kill him, you are the monster he says you are." Her eyes said, "If you kill him, there is no coming back." Dante looked at the police lights flashing through the windows. The doors were being battered down. He loosened his grip. He took a deep breath, and the red haze lifted. He rolled off Marco, pinning him down with a knee to the chest instead. "Stay down," Dante hissed. He stood up, pulling Marco up by his collar, keeping him used as a shield, but not to kill him. Dante turned to the main doors just as they burst open. A SWAT team poured in, rifles raised, blinding lights cutting through the gloom. "Freeze! Drop it! Police!" Dante looked at the lead detective, Thorne, who was standing behind the tactical team. Dante slowly raised his hands. He did not look defeated. He looked like a man who had just made the most important choice of his life. "I am unarmed." Dante shouted over the dying siren. "The weapon is on the floor." He shoved Marco toward the police. "That is your man," Dante called out. "He is the one you want for the racketeering and the attempted murder of these 2 civilians." Thorne signaled his men. They swarmed Marco, handcuffing him as he sputtered and cursed. Another team moved to untie Ava and Kyle. Thorne walked up to Dante, his gun lowered but ready. "You are under arrest, too." "Romano," Thorne said. "You know I have to take you in." "I know," Dante said calmly. He looked over Thorne's shoulder at Ava. She was rubbing her wrists, weeping silently. She started to run toward him, but a uniform officer held her back. "Dante!" she cried. "It is okay." "Ava," Dante said, his voice carrying across the distance. He looked at Thorne. "I want to make a deal." "Detective." Thorne raised an eyebrow. "You don't have much leverage." "Romano, I have everything," Dante said. "I have the ledgers. I have the routes. I have the names of the suppliers for the entire eastern seaboard. I can give you the heads of 3 rival families, including the rest of Marco's organization." Thorne paused. "That was a career-making offer. What do you want?" "I want immunity for my lower-level staff," Dante said, "and I want guaranteed protection for her and her mother. And for yourself?" Thorne asked. Dante looked at Ava again. He smiled, a sad, genuine smile. "I will take whatever you give me," Dante said, "as long as I get to walk away when it is done." The following months were a blur of courtrooms, depositions, and headlines. The trial of the century, the papers called it. The fall of the Romano crime family, not by a raid, but by a surrender. Kyle testified against Marco in exchange for probation, fleeing the state the moment he was released. Marco Leone was sentenced to 3 consecutive life terms. Dante kept his word. He dismantled his own empire piece by piece. He handed over hard drives, decoded ledgers, and testified against men he had once done business with. It was dangerous work. He spent 6 months in protective custody, isolated from everyone. But Ava was there. Every day of the hearings, she sat in the front row. She testified about the night in the warehouse. She told the jury about the man who saved her life, the man who stopped himself from killing, the man who chose love over violence. Her testimony humanized the monster. It turned the narrative from a mob boss getting caught to a man seeking redemption. Dante was sentenced to 5 years, but because of his extensive cooperation and the plea deal Ava helped secure, the sentence was suspended to time served and strict probation, provided he never associated with organized crime again. 8 months later, the offices of Romano Logistics Security were bright, modern, and located on the sunny side of the business district. There were no shadows here. The staff was made up of former soldiers looking for a second chance and young professionals who knew nothing of the old life. Ava walked into the corner office, carrying 2 coffees. She placed one on the large oak desk. "The contracts for the city municipal project are signed," she said, smiling. "We are officially legitimate contractors for the state." Dante turned away from the window. He looked different, lighter. The weight of the crown was gone. He wore a simple button-down shirt, no tie. "Legitimate," he repeated, tasting the word. "It sounds boring." Ava laughed, walking around the desk. "Boring is good. Boring is safe. Boring means we go home at 5 and cook dinner." Dante reached out and pulled her onto his lap. She went willingly, wrapping her arms around his neck. He looked at her, his gray eyes clear and warm. He ran his hand down her back, resting it possessively at her waist. "I never thought I would have this," he murmured, leaning his forehead against hers. "I thought my only exit was a coffin. You were wrong," Ava whispered. Dante kissed her. It was slow, unhurried, and filled with a profound relief. It wasn't the desperate kiss of a man trying to survive the night. It was the kiss of a man who had 1,000 nights ahead of him. He pulled back, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You saved me, Ava, in the warehouse." "Yes, but long before that, you saved me the moment you fainted in my lobby." Ava smiled, tracing his lip with her thumb. "And you caught me. I will always catch you," Dante promised. Outside, the sun set over the city, casting a warm orange glow over the skyline. For the first time, Dante Romano didn't own the city, but looking at the woman in his arms, he knew he had something worth infinitely more. He had a life, and he had love, and that was enough. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope you enjoyed the journey of Dante and Ava from the dangerous underworld to their hard-earned happy ending. I would love to know where you're listening from today. Please leave a comment below with your country or city. It is always amazing to see how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to Mafia Romance Stories for more passionate, emotional, and thrilling tales. Don't forget to like the video and share your thoughts in the comments in English. I read every single one of them. See you in the next story.